All right, we got a lot to learn in chapter 5, and it's all about fractions and decimals and adding and subtracting them, and then solving equations with fraction and decimals. So let's get started. We're going to start first by writing fractions as decimals. So you'll need to, have your long division on. So here we go. So I asked you to learn a bunch of benchmark fractions. Hopefully you took that sheet and filled it out. Benchmark fractions are fractions that we use often and you should be familiar with, like a half and a quarter and 2/4 and 3/4. And you should know all of your fifths because that's easy, 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, and so on. You should know your sixes. You should know 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and 6/6, obviously. Your sevens, you don't need to know. They just understand that they repeat. You should know your eights for sure, especially the unusual eights like 1/8, 3/8, and 5/8, and 7/8. You should know your nines, repeat the numerator. You should know your tens because those are simple. And you should know your 11, did I say nines? Yep. And you should know your tens. So hopefully you'll get to know these. Unfortunately, you don't know your 16ths, which is fine because this is when we're going to go into long division. So you're going to get a paper and pencil, and then you're going to start your process. And you're going to say, all right, how many groups of 16 go into 1? Bring your decimal up. Can't go into 10, can't go into 0, can't go into 10, but it can go into 100 6 times. Subtract, and you keep going until it terminates or repeats. And in this case, it terminated. So you're done. 6, and I want you to know how to read them. Don't say the word point anymore. You put a 1 in the ones place and then follow it with zeros. Or you simply count 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros, go behind a 1. So this is 625 10,000ths is how you do that. Okay? I could show you another way to divide. So let's do that. Okay, so here's another way of doing the division, and it's in these what's like rectangular boxes. It's a pretty good way. Also, I always teach, you won't need all of these boxes, but I always say, okay, don't forget, first of all, a fraction, proper fractions are less than 1. So if you end up putting the wrong number inside and the wrong number outside, you should know because a proper fraction is less than 1. I always say make an L, turn and divide. This is on the outside, this is on the inside. So we're going to start with putting the 1 right here. And then I'm going to put zeros off to the side like this. Really flush to the side. The decimal is right here, so I'm going to just bring it right up. Okay. 16 goes into 1 0 times. 16 times 0 is 0. Subtract, carry it up. 16 goes into 10 0 times. Put a 0 down. Subtract it. Bring the 10 up. Now it's 16 goes into 100. And that's when we're going to start to 16 goes into 100 how many times? We want to say 6 times, right? So 16 times 6 is equal to 96, like that. Subtract and you get a 4. You're going to bring the 4 up here and say 16 goes into 40 how many times? You would say 2 times. And 16 times 2 is 32. And you subtract. And you bring the 8 up. And then you say 16 goes into 85 times. It helps you keep track of the numbers better, I think. And it keeps them in line on top of the rectangle. So I really like this method. I didn't need all this room. And there you go. Okay, so here we go. I'm not letting you use a calculator, but if you did, you enter it into the calculator exactly the way you read it. Okay, this is a benchmark fraction. I told you to get it memorized, but let's pretend like you don't. Hopefully you'll be smart enough to get it memorized, but if you don't, then you just have to work a little bit harder, and it takes you longer to do your homework, and it takes you longer to do an assessment. And if it takes you longer to do an assessment, what if you don't finish the assessment within a certain amount of time that you're allowed it? So it's good to get to know. So again, you put a 3 in the center. Then you put a whole bunch of zeros here. I don't know how many you'll need. You probably won't need that many, but we got them if we need them. You get your decimal slapped down. So then you say, how many times does 8 go into 3? Well, it can't. 8 times 0 is nothing. Subtract, bring up the 3. But 8 can go into 30 3 times. 24. Borrow and subtract. 6 minus 4 is 2. Hello. How about 10 minus 4 is 6? I don't know what I was thinking there. 6. Bring the 6 up there. 8 goes into 60. How many times? 7. You get 56. Subtract. You get the 4. Bring the 4 up here. 8 goes into 45 times and you're done. Because this is a terminating decimal, it ended. 375 thousandths. 1 1/4. Well, when you do this, when you know that it's 1 and something, well, and 1/4 isn't 1/4 25 hundredths. Get that memorized if you don't know that. 2 3/5. I told you your fifths are easy. Just add a 0 here, and it would be 2 6/10, because 5 goes into 36 times 2 6/10. You don't know this one. Just know that your answer is going to be negative. Make sure you don't drop that. And remember that your negative can go right here next to the division line, or it could go next to that, the numerator, or it could go next to the denominator. It doesn't matter where you put it. I prefer it to be next to the numerator because I think it gets lost right here. But go ahead and do that math, and you'll find out that 33 goes into 4, 12 hundredths repeating. And when it's repeating, you just put a line over the numbers that repeat. 2 11ths. I told you to get your 11ths. That's your benchmark. But I'm going to show you it with a rectangle. Whoa. Something happened with that rectangle. Okay, so I put the 2 here, and then I put zeros. Bring the decimal up. This is, how many times does 11 go into 2? It doesn't. Bring down the 2, bring up the 2. 11 goes into 21 time. Put that down. Subtract, you get 9. Bring up the 9. 11 goes into 98 times. Subtract, you get a 2 again. Oh, do you notice we're repeating? So it's 18 hundredths repeating. Negative 2/3, you should get memorized. 6/10 repeating, negative, and then 4/15 you would actually have to do. When you're comparing two numbers, you definitely need to either put them both into decimals or both into fractions. If you can read it, you can write it. I taught you how to read it. There's only one place, so 1 0, so it's 7/10. So I could write it 7/10 compared to 13/20. So much easier just to cross multiply. So this you would get 130, and this one you get 140. Clearly 7/10 is larger. So cross multiply to compare. Just make sure you change them both into something that you can work with. This is a benchmark fraction. If you knew your benchmark fractions, and you would know that decimal right away, or you could just change 4/10 into a fraction and do your multiplication, cross multiplying, and see the 4/10 is larger. 16/20 and 20/25. I would take the time to simplify this to be 4/5 and simplify this to be 4/5. So then you can say they're actually equal. 5/8 and 3/5, those are about both benchmark fractions. If you had them memorized, then you would know that 5/8 is 625 thousandths, and that 3/5 is 6/10. If not, multiply 24 here, 25 here, greater. And that's it.